So good afternoon and welcome to the Oregon Transportation Commission meeting on December 12th, 2023. And I want to welcome everyone. I see that Commissioner Smith is on the virtual end of it, and unfortunately Commissioner Chapman isn't here yet, but the rest of us are. And so we are going to go ahead and proceed with the meeting. So we have public comment this afternoon, but there's only one person signed up. So Commissioner Savas, if you would like to join us, we would love to hear from you.
Push the button. Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Brown and members of the commission. I'm Clackamas County Commissioner Paul Savas, and I'm here to comment on agenda items C and D today. I recognize this commission is passionate about the transportation challenges facing the state of Oregon. Safety, climate, and equity are the three key goals for ODOT. My concern about the path ODOT is taking not only compromise the aforementioned goals, but may challenge the key purpose of what DOTs are all about: moving goods, services, and people as efficiently as possible. As Commissioner Beyer has astutely recognized, our transportation system is suffering from years of underinvestment. The 5.8-mile stretch between the Abernathy Bridge and Stafford exit of 205 is failing. As a result, 50,000 vehicles today are rerouting, diverting because of the congestion caused by the two-lane bottleneck. That's today. When I was last before you, I mentioned that it appeared ODOT is not taking responsibility for the existing diversion into account and the existing diversion onto the local streets into local neighborhoods and the accidents that it causes. Today, I bring you an example. This page here is the second page of the RTAC meeting, and you'll see that blank square under the column of arterial impacts and diversions. That blank spot is the no build being diversion. And it says basically there's no, essentially the reader would read it as there's no impacts to tolling or no diversion impacts as to the no build. I argue there is. It's that 50,000 cars per day. At best, this is misleading to decision makers. I presume state legislators and the governor's office will continue to hear ODOT presentations where diversion is downplayed and or rarely mentioned. Two studies on Highway 217 indicated that tolling would bring negative impacts to local roads for the very same reason, yet the existing diversion on 205 goes unchecked. Clackamas County and our partners are puzzled by this double standard and requested a full EIS because of these issues. Are we to forego safety, climate, equity, and economic stability to families because ODOT's need for revenue is more important? We ask you that you suspend this tolling program and do a deep dive on diversion data, the operational cost of tolling, the capital cost to implement tolling, and the actual cost of responsible mitigation projects. You may find this section of 205, like Highway 217, is not a suitable candidate for tolling and will probably cost more money than it will actually generate. To be clear, Clackamas County recognizes that gas tax is a diminishing revenue source, and we are committed to engaging in conversations to find solutions to the impending funding cliff. Because shortfalls will not only affect ODOT, but the counties and cities as well, as we share the 50-30-20 revenue split. That is why we are interested in solutions that retain revenue sharing, a crucial funding stream for local jurisdictions statewide that supports improvements on all road types. To this point, ODOT has approached development of tolling and congestion pricing as something that only belongs to them. Instead, funding solutions must be developed collaboratively with buy-in from local jurisdictions, a sentiment reflected in our joint value statement, also submitted with my written testimony. Most of all, let's work together on new funding mechanisms that did not induce diversion. We continue to stand united with our regional partners in asking for your help to direct ODOT staff to work with us and to take the time to get this right so that we can realize our shared vision of a transportation system that is safe, equitable, and balanced. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for the comment, because I think it is important and we are considering everything that comes to us. And so this conversation, I think, is one worth taking a look at and having a conversation amongst the staff and really trying to look at what we're doing. So thank you. again, I know that you've been meeting with each one of us personally and showing us that diversion and the different things that are happening in your county. And we appreciate your continued push to us to do better. So thank you.
Thank you for all your work.
Bet.
Happy holidays.
You too. And I also want to say we received quite a few letters in our packet with public comment, which we aren't going to read to you. But again, thank you to everyone that has commented. And we look forward to considering all comments that come to us. So we're moving right along, which is good. We're on to item C, our discussion on tool roll making. And I think Travis, good afternoon. So good to see you. Not that I didn't want to see Garrett too. I'll see you.
I'll take the seconds.
Okay.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, I'm Travis Brower, ODOT's Assistant Director for Revenue Finance Compliance, and I'll let Garrett introduce himself as well.
Yeah, Garrett Pryor, he, him pronouns. I'm ODOT's toll policy manager.
So we recognize that we have had many conversations with you over the last several months in the course of the year. And we have also provided you a vast pile of paper on these toll rules to go through. So we're going to try to keep our conversation today relatively brief from Garrett and I, and then give you some time to ask questions, point out any issues you see. Because we are here today really asking you for input and a general thumbs up on these draft toll rules before we take them out for public comment. We are not asking you for final official approval. That comes at the end of the public comment process. And I will also note later in the presentation that this will not be your last bite at the apple, even when you approve them next June. So we're going to start today on the substantive component of this with a recap of the discussion in recent months on the low income toll program from Mr. Pryor.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And again, after this slide, we'll kind of pause to hear from your direction and discussion. So jumping into it, we've been before you at your September and November meetings, kind of went really in depth on this. And so out of those discussions, we've incorporated your feedback, and I'll ask for your ratification of the approach that you see today. There are 4 elements of that approach that residents of Oregon and Washington State would be able to enroll. This would be a percentage discount on each transaction, as opposed to kind of loading of monthly credits or free trips for this major program. A commitment to implement a 50% discount for customers whose income is 200% or below the federal poverty level. Again, that helps us not create our own income verification system, but leverage existing programs. And a commitment to study 10 and 25% discounts for up to 300 and 400% of the federal poverty in the further traffic and revenue analysis studies, and bring that back to inform your decision on whether or not to offer this tier. Also an issue with that would not be available on that 2026 day 1 of tolling, but something that would come on in a later version. In your November meeting, you kind of gave us a general thumbs up and on this direction, but you said you wanted to have that robust discussion with EMAC as well to gain their input. Commissioner Chapman, myself, others were at that meeting. As you see in your comment letters in your packet, for each one of these, you have a general consensus from the Equity and Mobility Advisory Committee with some kind of additional, more work needed items on details. We think a lot of those are pretty friendly, and definitely things we can work on that are in addition or outside of the decisions you would be making today or what you see in the tolling rules. So with that, unless the commission would like to modify or add anything additional onto the direction, we would be ready to move forward with these elements. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair Brown and Commission.
There we go. Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, just a question on the 3rd bullet there. A commitment to implement a 50% discount. Was it a solid 50%, or did we give ourselves some flexibility to go further than that, depending upon the feedback? I thought we were talking about at least a 50% discount rather than a floor at 50.
Commissioner Baker, what we took this to be was a recommendation to move forward. I think you're correct in the sense that there is a floor of 50%. That is what we will be specifically modeling in the level 2 and level 3 traffic and revenue analysis. The commission could modify that if there is direction to do so. But we wanted to make, at least at this point, a specific commitment. We are moving forward with a discount. It will be 50%, arguably could be greater. You could also come back in the future and reduce that. But we thought it was very important to get that marker out there at this point as the default option that we're going to be moving forward toward.
Okay, so this doesn't lock us in if we get in our public feedback an ask for a greater number than 50%, we can consider it.
Commissioner Baker, this will be a number that can be flexible over time. I mean, on day one, we will have a benefit, and we will expect that that will be reviewed on a regular basis to determine the impact on traffic, on revenue, on commuters' pocketbooks, and that you would be able to adjust that at a future date before go live or after.
Yeah, I think it gets back to, a comment I made at the last commission meeting. It's 50% of what. And once everybody knows what the what is, that 50% number, might need to move.
Yes.
Fair point.
Thank you.
So other commissioners and Commissioner Smith, if you, I forget to look over at the screen. So if you want to comment, just, mute yourself and make your comment. So, because sometimes I don't see your hand.
Oh, I'll make sure I make myself known if I have a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else would like to comment? Commissioner Chapman? No, you need the red light. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, I was really encouraged with EMAC to have full support behind the 50% number. And I think there was a recognition that we have sort of a triple mandate here where we're trying to raise revenue. Obviously, we want to consider equity and make sure it's not overly cumbersome to our most vulnerable travelers. But there's also the reality that if we did a full 100% or even greater than 50%, it might incentivize people to take more trips. And we do also want to reduce vehicle miles traveled to help meet our safety and our decarbonization goals. So there's definitely the potential to have a totally free trip with a 50% discount from ODOT. And then most of the people that would be eligible for that are probably also getting, or at least aware of, some other wraparound services through WorkSource or SNAP, and those agencies could provide a reimbursement, but it still encourages people to be a little bit more thoughtful with their trip planning. So they're getting a discount up front and then they're getting reimbursed for the difference after the fact. And I think for most people, or at least what the modeling has shown, that would encourage fewer total trips. So I think this makes sense for now, but I agree with you. We should be flexible once we actually see the actual travel data.
Vice Chair Byer?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I think the other side of the equity argument that I am reading, and most of the thing in the committee comments, was there was a sense that everybody should pay something. So I think this is a reasonable place to start.
It is, and I think that there's a couple other factors that flow into this. Of course, the I-5 bridge and the work we're doing with the commission from Washington. And then my question to the staff is the commitment to study the 10%, 25% discounts. Do we have a timeline on that? I probably missed it in all of the information that you gave us, but what is that timeline and what's it look like?
Chair Brown, we would be studying that in the level 2 traffic revenue analysis for the I-205 project, which should be, I will actually later this year, but more importantly, it'll be the level 3 traffic and revenue analysis for the I-205 project, which will be done sometime in 2025. We hope that we can front load some of this analysis so that we can get information at the beginning of 2025 to help you make a decision. My guess is that may be multiple conversations to come to a final decision.
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yeah, one other factor that I'm reminded of as we talk about this is the discussion that Commissioner Chapman and I had I think it was last week with the Washington people. I keep thinking as we're looking at this about the 205 issues, but remind me that we're thinking about the whole system, and currently Washington State does not have any discounts. And so we've got a ways to go to bring them into common thinking with our state as we look at the interstate bridge project.
And that's the thing that I think that's so apparent with any of our network or what we're doing is that we struggle with this because it's different for each project or where we're trying to actually stand this up. And I think the other part is when I hear, in 2025, people have anxiety over this. I mean, this is really a pressure point with a lot of people in the metropolitan area that are just like waiting on us. And it's unfortunate that we had to start the conversation so far ahead of being able to give them an answer to what we're doing. But I think that goes back to the transparency and really trying to make this right. This is something new for the state of Oregon that we're really going to have to implement, and we don't want to do it wrong. And so it does take multiple conversations and ideas. And so I just feel bad because I know that there are people who really are wanting an answer from us and we just don't have it. And so I ask if anyone's watching this to just have patience here because we are trying to do what's right.
And I'll just build quickly up your comment there, Chair Brown, because when we went to the EMAC discussion, having that clarity of here's our discount level, that would be that alleviates so much uncertainty and fear. And like Commissioner Chapman just said, then EMAC's able to think about, well, what are creative ways we can work to add on to this? But just to know that this is what we're going to be doing, that it just helps, I think, so much navigate this difficult issue.
All right. Well,
So
thank you.
That was short and
That
sweet.
was all we needed for today.
All
As
right.
long as there was no change in direction, we understand the sort of the parameters you've set. So now Garrett will continue and we'll start walking through the toll rules and where we need to go on those.
Excellent. So we've been hard at work this past year in developing new toll rules with our State Toll Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or STRAC. We've had, as you can see online, 2 specific equity-focused in-language discussion groups, reaching out and meeting with members of the trucking community, and then also the general public. You'll hear a little deeper dive on each one of those soon. And in your meeting packet is very robust, kind of 70+ pages on that engagement report and detailed appendix. And what's really interesting to see a bit are kind of where do you see similarities across those groups and where do you see differences within those groups and kind of cross coordination there. We're hoping to accomplish today is to receive feedback from you on some of the major items in the rules. If there's anything you want us to flag or comment there, we'll then conduct a thorough review with Department of Justice and getting those ready to publish with Secretary of State, that's SOS, and conduct our final round of public engagement leading up to OTC adoption in June. That brings you to the bottom right corner of the screen. Just to point out, though, where we have this broken into different part 1, part 2, the meeting here today, this is really out of our pursuit of equity, to take these longer, kind of very linear decision-making processes and build them into more iterative loops where we're able to give that feedback and make those adjustments in time. Even the toll rules that you see in your packet today, they look, it's a nice clean copy, but those have been through 3 very robust rounds of review with our all those engagement groups that we talked about before. If you go into the packet there's even a document that highlights in the rules in green and in yellow all the pieces that have been changed from when we started this in January to now. So it's a really kind of, just know there's been a good amount of work done today with even more to come. Let's go to the next slide. So this is our balancing act in rulemaking, taking what's in law and what's in state policy, but in providing more specificity to the customer and the public, how ODOT will implement that direction, but not to get overly litigious or detailed to where you lock yourself into basically bad customer service practices or inflexibility to where you would have to go back through a full rulemaking process to adjust. So we know with that, a lot of the details around, what's going to be the marketing and enrollment approach? What's the pamphlet going to look like if I have an unpaid toll bill? These are those types of details that you're not going to see in the toll rules, but people had a lot of questions about. So again, in a way of kind of doing business differently from a rulemaking standpoint, we provided a lot of our current thinking or procedural documents to let people know what could those details look like, or what do other tolling systems do to where they were able to give comment on the draft rules. And that's why I think you see general acceptance from a good number of our rulemaking committee members on the rules themselves, even if they did have outstanding issues with either details or on some policy direction of tolling in general. Next slide. So here's a nice little Zoom screenshot of our STRAC members. These were folks from throughout Oregon, every corner of the state, even into Washington. We even had one Pennsylvania, Philadelphia Eagles fan from Penske Trucking. I would just know because I'm a Browns fan, we had a little back and forth. But we had 9 monthly meetings. Folks gave up 3 hours, a good chunk, even more for a couple of the meetings. We had some just absolutely stellar committee members that even helped us outside of these meetings show up to the community organization discussions, show up to the trucking discussions, help us spread this throughout their networks. So just kudos to this committee. And again, just Travis's comment at the last meeting was that just a wonderful group of folks that had positions and points about tolling, but weren't oppositional or positional, like really knew that kind of this is what we're accomplishing here in the toll rules and was able to provide that feedback in a really constructive way. Next slide. So again, we know you can't always, especially with hard to reach, traditionally underserved communities, it's really hard to get those folks to come to us or sit on an advisory committee meeting. So we needed to do something in addition to that. And the same thing with our trucking and small business folks. We had a couple that were able to sit on the committee, but we know that's a big time commitment, because time is money each day. And so we conducted 88 focus group participants, 22 community-based organizations. We actually started like a monthly meeting cadence with them and grew each month. Over 4,700 tabling event attendees, and then at our trucking webinars, over 90 attendees is there as well. And so not everything that was suggested made the cut, but we tried as much as we could to incorporate feedback where we could. And we were also able to show, because a lot of times in tolling, especially, we had this like fiscal inequity impact statement. And so when you think about what are the fiscal inequity impacts of tolling, you could have a whole broad range of input there. So what we were able to do, again, out of our equity approach, was take and really clearly show kind of here's your input and here's where it applies to the rules, and here's maybe other decision-making processes where that input would head to as well.
Hold on, Gary. Vice Chair.
I'm curious the difference between the focus groups and the community. Was there much changes in perceptions or discussion points with the focus groups when they got into a conversation versus people who just testified?
So I want to talk first about who's at those different meetings. So the focus group meetings are through a contracting service we've been working through with multiple years, where it's in language, it's folks that will just be the customers there. Whereas the community-based organizations are usually like nonprofit executive directors or kind of representatives of that. So at times when we talk to those groups, some of the like rulemaking and policy decisions, you don't get as much input at the focus group level because they're really worried about how will I sign up? How will I pay this bill? What will be the cost? So you get some of the, sorry, and are you referring to like Commissioner Savas and the comments we heard there and any comments?
Yeah, my experience working in the past is it depends on how the focus group is structured, but there's a little more feedback and discussion in depth usually that you can get out of the focus group. The rule of thumb is focus group is more qualitative information. The bigger one is more quantitative, but less informed because you're getting a raw reaction by what people see rather than the discussions you get in focus groups. So I just was curious if you got anything different out of the focus group.
Yeah, mostly the same. I mean, just the questions a bit about, I think it's a common thread if folks want to know how much is this going to cost me? And so it takes a big jump in these conversations to get past that, to get into the more like some of the rulemaking stuff we're talking about, how the system will work. So it's really, you basically have to do time in to get to those levels. But generally, when we got to that, I'm just thinking about getting people to sign up for accounts and having a credit card or something like a standing bill. That's pretty similar between the focus groups and the community-based organizations. Concern about that of folks not wanting to park a bunch of money in a tolling account to keep a minimum balance when they need that money more flexibly to pay for, food, shelter, other more immediate needs. Right, next slide. All right, I think it's
Yeah.
address.
All right, so we are not going to walk you through the rules. We trust that you have read those. And we just wanted to flag that there are a large number of issues that are addressed in the rules. And I won't read all the text, but it is an omnibus rule. We wrote the entirety of the rule. So it includes everything from account types and fees to exemptions and the low-income toll program, and a few other things as well. Next slide, please. Maybe most importantly for the public comment, I think, is going to be the issues not addressed in the rule. You'll notice there was no one here today to comment on the rules because generally folks weren't that worked up about what was in the rules. And we did have one comment that's in your packet that I'll note. So I think what we'll probably hear more about in the public comment process is what's not in the rules. As we've noted in the past, toll rates are not included in the rules because we're not there yet. That will be a separate rulemaking process that we'll engage in 2025. We also have heard a number of times about a geographic toll discount that has come up in the legislature and from the comment that's in your packet from one of our STRAC members is about the impact that could occur to the local communities based on tolling at the Abernathy and other locations. We did not include that in the rule. That is a policy decision that would need to be made by the Transportation Commission. We also had a very robust discussion about exemptions. We had over 30 exemptions requested, which gives you the sense that, when you put this on the table, you're going to have a lot of folks knocking on your door asking for free trips. In the end, the general consensus of the committee was to limit the exemptions significantly so that everybody is paying. And then overall, you're reducing the rate that anyone is going to pay otherwise if you had more compared to if you had more exemptions. So the exemptions that I think we heard the most about that we may hear about in the process for school buses or van pools, but we do have a public transportation exemption and then a number of other exemptions that were required by law or that are related to public safety. And as we noted, we do not have the low-income toll program for up to 400% of federal poverty level because that will be something that will be determined later. So those are, I think, the issues that we heard the most about that were sort of left on the cutting room floor, some of them to be dealt with later, and others, things that we're deferring at this point in the process. So next slide, please. One of the major pieces that is in the rules is around the tribal toll exemption proposal. This is a conversation we had with some of you, at least in May. That may have been before Commissioner Baker and Chapman were on the commission. But from the time we started talking about tolls in 2022 in particular, we heard from tribal governments that they believe that they should be exempt from tolls because of their right to access their ancestral lands. And so after that conversation with the commission, we did propose an exemption for tribal members and tribal government vehicles based on the status of tribes as sovereign independent nations and recognizing their right to access their ancestral lands for hunting, fishing, gathering, cultural and religious purposes as well. In one of the attachments you have in front of you, we laid out a proposal and rationale for this proposal to explain how we reached this conclusion and how we got to a number of specific recommendations, because we want to make sure that we're on firm legal ground for this exemption. If you adopt this, it will be the first general tribal government toll exemption in the nation. Even in Washington State, they have a somewhat narrower approach or significantly narrower approach. So next slide, please. We went through the formal tribal government to government consultation process on the draft rule language this summer and into the fall. We had conversations with multiple tribal councils, intergovernmental meetings, formal comments. We talked with the various groups that the Legislative Commission on Indian Services convenes and had a really robust consultation process. As you can imagine, generally we heard strong support for this exemption from the tribal governments with just a few concerns that were really request to make sure that the exemption applied as broadly as possible and that people were able to access it. Next slide, please. So through that process, we made a number of changes. We increased the number of vehicles because we had constrained that probably a little bit too much. We added some statements on membership privacy because it was very important for the tribal governments that any information about an individual's membership in a tribe is between that person and the tribe and should not be a matter of public record. So that is protected in these rules. And we also added some language about direction to provide exemptions for tribal youth and elders who do not have their own vehicles and tribal employees that use their personal vehicles for tribal business. So that is about the broadening to make sure everyone has access to this exemption. Next slide, please. We will continue to have government-to-government consultation to develop and support adoption of the draft rules and then into implementation. I did want to flag a couple of the issues that we're still going to be working on. So one major issue is that the Nez Perce and Yakima tribal nations have specific provisions in their treaties with the U.S. government that exempt them from paying tolls. They have asked that the state of Oregon recognize that right as the state of Washington and other toll operators have done. And so we are working with them to determine the most appropriate statement, most appropriate way to recognize that treaty right. We made it clear to them we will respect that treaty right. And so the state of Washington, for example, and the Gorge toll operators have done policy statements recognizing that. And so that is a venue we may work through with them. We also have some details to work through on implementation about some of the specifics like tribal government employees who aren't tribal members, youth and elders. Those are things we're going to be working through both through consultation, through the implementation process, because much of that doesn't need to be in the rules per se. It will be in that procedural level that Garrett spoke about earlier. So we'll continue that government-to-government consultation and develop intergovernmental agreements with tribes who want to have those developed in 2024 and beyond. I sense a question coming from Vice Chair Byer, so I paused.
Questions, Vice Chair?
So, well, I assume this applies to any tribal member in Washington or Oregon, but does it go farther than that? Do we get to Montana and Idaho or any place else? And is it basically sort of if you want it, you can apply?
Mm-hmm. Chair Byer or Vice Chair Byer, good question. I should have mentioned that. There is a specific list of tribes that have been acknowledged by the federal government as having connections to the land in Oregon and thus have some desire to access those sites for a variety of purposes. We have laid those out in the rules. And so any tribal member from those tribes could apply and prove their membership status either through the tribal government sharing that information with us or providing, a piece of documentation that we would verify. They would then have an exempt account created for them.
Let me ask it again. Does that apply to any tribe? I know there's a difference. The Yakimas and Nez Perce have specific language that actually preceded statehood in Oregon. But does that apply to all the tribes in Oregon and Washington?
It would apply to the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, as well as a handful of tribes in Washington, and I believe 1 in Northern California that has access to lands in Southern Oregon. So we would expect, and it would be any member of those tribes, whether they were resident in Oregon or not. We would expect, as you can imagine, that the exempt accounts would be clustered among those living in or near the Portland metro region, more than other parts of the state.
Yeah, it's probably self-selecting, but let me ask it. Are there any Oregon tribes or Washington tribes that are excluded?
Vice Chair Byer, there are Washington has something like 36 federally recognized tribes. Not all of them have any connection to Oregon, and thus we only went with those that have a connection to Oregon.
Yeah.
The list is in the rules, and that includes, I believe, say the Cowlitz tribe, but it wouldn't include, say, the Lummi tribe from Whatcom County, as they are 300 miles from the Oregon border.
It seems like it could be a problem, particularly as we're trying to develop that conforming policy between the two states. It probably is, if you include them, it probably isn't a problem because it's unlikely that people up on the Canadian border are going to apply anyway. I see that as I'm going to defer, but I see that as an issue that could be a problem.
Yes. Director.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Chris Strickler, Director of the Oregon Department of Transportation. I just wanted to offer just a process piece, which is the commission certainly can deliberate and offer additional exemptions. There are probably other factors that we would have to do some research on as far as implications to other systems in Washington and those kinds of things. Certainly what we've contemplated up to this point is a narrower set, but it does include all of the Oregon tribal governments. But the commission certainly could go further if the commission chooses.
And looking at our materials, I think there's 16 tribes that are identified.
Yes.
And then I'm not sure, it doesn't look like there's Washington tribes in this list of 16, or is there? Okay, I didn't.
Chair
see the
Brown, yes,
Yakima.
at least the Cowlitz and the Yakima. I will say that this was one of the most complicated elements and something we went around on for quite some time. We believe that to be on the solidest legal ground, we should require that a tribe demonstrate some connection to the state of Oregon so that it is clear that members would legitimately be using a toll exemption in order to access ancestral lands or traditional hunting, gathering, fishing, cultural sites. This is what we brought forward through the consultation process, and we were pleasantly surprised that it garnered support from a wide variety of folks. We did hear some concerns, but generally behind the scenes, and every tribal council that we talked to had no objections to the list of tribes and seemed to feel that it was an appropriate method. I will tell you, this was a difficult challenge that we talked about having a geographic catchment area, but recognized that it was hard to create a new list of tribes as opposed to relying on an existing process that has identified tribes that have an acknowledged connection to the state of Oregon. All right.
I'm sorry. I was looking over at Commissioner Smith. So go ahead, Commissioner Chapman.
I'm relieved to hear how thorough the process has been because honestly, reading through some of the comments from the tribal representatives made my head spin. I do have a couple questions for you. I'm sure will be covered in the procedure, but just to make sure that it's on the record and everyone's clear, the eligibility will be verified by the tribe, not by ODOT directly, correct?
Commissioner Chapman, we will work that out with each tribe. We will likely have a default that a tribal member who is a member of a tribe that is on the list but does not have an IGA with ODOT that says something different, we would be able to look at their tribal identification document and make that determination and then destroy the documentation. So we are not retaining that. For tribes, we will offer, though, that they will be able to do either a verification or even do the enrollment process for themselves so that they are simply providing us a list of accounts to create on behalf of their tribal members. So that's one of the implementation details is how we're going to work with the tribes to do that verification process. Recognizing each tribal government is sovereign and independent, and so each will have essentially a choice as to how they want to engage in that process. There is no one size fits all approach.
Thank you. And when we talked about just operationalizing the low-income toll program, I think the idea was there would essentially be a sticker in your car that has some sort of scanning, the tolling device is scanning that and then providing the rate information to ODOT directly. Would that still be the case with tribal members or tribal affiliated personnel, or would it be something that can be moved from vehicle to vehicle?
Commissioner Chapman, in general, they would, yes, receive the toll tag that they can put, the toll sticker that they can put in their car. It's also possible we might be able to just read their license plate. Okay. That will be one of the operational details. And then we will issue them as many of the toll tags as they need for each vehicle, because each of those toll tags is specific to a vehicle. So if you go underneath a transponder reader and it doesn't catch it, you want to then read the license plate and say, oh, that's attached to that transponder.
Right.
Somehow we didn't read the transponder. So you do want to have one transponder for each vehicle.
Got it. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments about the tribal toll elements? Okay, and I will note on page 18 of the rules is the list of the tribal governments that would be exempted. All right, next slide, please. So Garrett ran through a little bit of the next steps, and I just want to give you just a sense of what's going on. We're going to ask you for your general thumbs up today and any feedback and input that we should make before we go through the public comment process on these rules. We're also going to go through with Department of Justice review. They have been at our side throughout the process. Garrett has probably burned up a lot of money in DOJ fees, but that's important to get that up front. But they need to do a full comprehensive review. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of the legal issues and legal risk that we will bear with these rules. And then we'll do some other steps to prepare the rules for public engagement, publish with the Secretary of State in March, public comment period in April. And then we'll be back to you in June, and that will be your up or down vote on the rules. I will note, though, of course, this will not be your last bite at the apple. I am 100% certain that we will not get it 100% right on the first time through. There will be changes we need to make as we implement the system or things we recognize we didn't get quite right. And we'll be reopening the rules in any case to do the toll rate setting in 2025. So we'll be reopening these rules. So anything that we find at some point in the process, you'll be able to move forward with. We do think that this is going to be very important to get these rules in place well in advance of go live, to the point that Chair Brown made. A lot of people are very nervous about this, and to the extent that we can offer some surety, this is how it's going to work, will be really helpful for the public conversation. It's also going to be really helpful as we begin the traffic and revenue analysis to have a few things nailed down, and we can show them the rules, we can show them the low-income toll program, and it's also going to be helpful as we bring on a vendor to set up the back office system and customer service center. They'll know this is what they need to be able to do, particularly with the exemptions and discounts and whatnot, to be able to see that. I will note that those exemptions and discounts, the relatively robust low-income toll program and tribal exemptions that are really the first in their nation of that size and scope, do add a layer of complexity to the work that's going to need to be done in developing this toll system. So that will require a lot of work to operationalize. It will be some things that are a little bit new to whoever our toll vendor is. And it's going to be a higher cost, both to set up and for ongoing operations costs. But we think that these are still the right things to do. I will note that there is legal risk inherent in these toll rules. All along, we've done what we can to minimize and mitigate those issues by choosing the path forward, particularly on things like the tribal toll rule and the low-income toll program. We're going to have further review by DOJ, and they'll point out some areas where we may be able to take some additional steps. But we expect that because tolling is often very litigious, it's quite likely that regardless of what we do, we could face litigation in the future. That is the case for many toll systems that have been stood up across the country. And particularly there is risk around at the federal level with the Interstate Commerce Clause, and whether you're having a disproportionate impact on in-state versus out-of-state travelers. We cannot have a disproportionate impact on out-of-state travel. And so we have kept that in our mind as we've gone through this process. So with that, next slide, please. Really, the feedback we're looking for today is, are there any major issues we need to address, edits needed before we put those rules out on the street for public comment, and any additional changes that are made beyond today, either based on your feedback, based on DOJ review, we will provide to you before we put them out on the street for public comment. And then as we think about engagement, what is important to you about how we engage the public about this set of rules as it goes through that public comment process before your final adoption? So with that, be happy to take your input and feedback.
Hey, commissioners, does anybody Vice Chair? Who wants to go first? You guys gonna fight? Okay.
Just thinking about this, it just sort of keeps ringing in my mind that we're going to have an implementation problem about like we had with the real ID card in terms of just administrative nightmare at one point. So I think the getting out in front of that and planning for that is going to be a big deal. And a lot of people like on Real ID will wait until the last minute and then be mad because they can't get their discount.
Yeah, and Vice Chair Byer, our goal will be to get as many people signed up on day one with a toll tag in their car, with an account set up, tied to a credit card, because that will be easiest for the customers, it will be cheapest for the customers, and it will be easiest for ODOT as well. But we know the first 6 months of any toll system are typically a little bit bumpy. As you have people acclimating to the system, starting to set up their account, you will have massive numbers of people who do not precisely follow the rules, and we will have to determine how strict we want to be. Short answer is probably not 100% strict about that.
Commissioner Baker.
Thank you. A couple of comments and then a question. The first comment, and it leads back to what you were talking about in terms of the input from the tribes, but here in terms of the group discussion summary, number one, right out of the box is participants mentioned they do not trust ODOT to protect their information. I think that, there's a lot of discussion outside of the tribes. And as we go down through this, we all ought to be very, very sensitive to the issues in and around protecting data, trusting data, making sure that there aren't breaches, and that we ought to go to every extent possible to really think about how we protect everybody's information through the process. Second comment is this is impressive work. And I think you've done a really nice job. And it's we know it's not where we're going to end, but it certainly gives us a framework for stepping forward. I do have a question on one word, and that's diversion. And on page 11 in rule 0060 down in 3C.
Sorry, wrong page.
Operations of the tollway or tollway project and major roadways nearby, including safety and traffic levels. Does this, are you attempting to get a diversion in this rule?
Yeah, Commissioner Baker, that is what we're getting at with that. And it covers both the tollway and those routes that you could see rerouting or diversion occur on.
Okay. Just as a thought, there's a lot of discussion in and around diversion and whether or not we've heard the comments in and around diversion, that it might not be a bad idea to mention the word in our rules to acknowledge that it exists. And then you might choose to add it also in the definitions. And for me, diversion is a little bit like cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. There's good diversion. In other words, if we divert somebody onto a bus or onto a bike or onto a walking path, good diversion. Bad conversion would be we put cars on local roadways. So maybe as we think about diversion, because there's good elements, there's elements that are not desirable, that maybe we include both of those in our definitions. Just a thought.
Chair Baker, I think that's a very good point about 3C. I think we can add diversion in there. The definition, I will tell you, is a little challenging. I'd have to go back and look at the policy, the OHP policy that the commission approved earlier this year, as defining diversion can be a little challenged. Now, there's a clear diversion case where I hop off, I'm going to the airport from Wilsonville, and I hop off to avoid the toll on the Abernathy Bridge and take the Arch Bridge through Oregon City. There's other cases of diversion that are a little bit more ambiguous, like, for example, a resident of West Lynn who might get on at, I think it's the 10th Street interchange, but instead drives to Stafford Road and gets on there if we were to have tolling at, say, the Tualatin River Bridge. That's using the local system a little bit longer, but not really going out of their route, just not getting on the freeway as quickly. So I'll explore that question of whether we can define diversion effectively. at the very least, I think we can work it into this.
I think if we can get a definition, wrap our arms around it, because obviously it's a term that comes up and comes up and comes up and comes up. We need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. And there's as Commissioner Savas pointed out, there's already diversion as a result of bottlenecks that we have in the system. So, but a good definition of it, I think, is going to be important because we're going to be talking about it a lot. So, thank you.
Do you have another comment? Or are you good? Vice Chair Cotton.
Oh, at the risk of belaboring it, that's really hard to do. I mean, I think about when I drive to my daughter's house she lives off of Shoals Road over in West Beaverton. And it's sort of like my decision about, am I going to go on 217 or am I just going to take the cutoff off Carmen Road? And most often I do that just because I would rather drive through the neighborhood than go on 217, but particularly now with the construction, but it's hard to define. I think it's just hard to define. There's a lot of people historically, you live in that neighborhood. Did you take 205? It could be a decision when you pull out of your driveway in the morning. I think it's just really hard to answer that. The reality is a lot of people are using the other roads already.
Anything else for us, Travis? I don't think there's any other comments from the commission, so.
No, that was all. We appreciate your engagement in this process. You've been very helpful throughout as we've had regular check-ins. You will be hearing back again from us in June with the official paper work to approve or not approve or modify the rules as they come back after the process. So thank you for your engagement.
And I guess the other point is the Department of Justice will be looking at it too. So there may be
Again.
some corrections that we see happen.
Yep, definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item D, actually is a decision to it. And that's on the equity and mitigation report. Who is it? Is Brendan here? Oh, there he is.
Greetings and good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Byer, members of the Commission. For the record, I'm Brendan Finn, Director of ODOT's Urban Mobility Office. Here today to review the Oregon Toll Program Implementation Report, which really represents a point in time that's a plan for the future for the Oregon Toll Program. We're looking to get your feedback today, Madam Chair, Commissioners, and approval to finalize this draft implementation report prior to submitting it to Governor Kotek by December 15th. I'd like to thank the Commission for your ongoing guidance, your review of this document and input as this report really does outline where we're heading into the future. Next slide, please. A little background on the Governor's request to the agency. On May 4th of this year, Governor Kotek directed ODOT to delay the collection of tolls until January 1st, 2026 at the earliest, citing that need for ODOT to talk more and address concerns from the public and partners about equity and traffic diversion impacts. And Commissioner Baker, I think we're definitely talking about the bad diversion there. The governor did request that we prepare this implementation report, which really has two main components that represents kind of our game plan to mitigate diversion and address equity. Next slide. The draft implementation plan, you can go to the next one, please. Thank you. The report introduces legislative and executive direction, and then it's divided into two main parts, the Equitable Toll Program Development Plan and the Diversion Mitigation and Management Plan. I'll give a quick overview here and then dive into some specifics of each plan a little bit later in the presentation. The Equitable Toll Program Development Plan describes how ODOT centers equity and the voices of historically excluded and underserved communities in the past and future actions and decisions. Describes how that input from equity communities and regional partners has shaped the program development to date and how it will into the future. The chapter following that, the Diversion Management and Mitigation Plan, represents ODOT's approach to limiting vehicle diversion from tolled highways onto local streets. Go to the next slide, please. A little bit about the approach to putting this together. Since the governor's announcement, we've been taking a lot of extra time to increase our community engagement efforts and really work with our partners to better understand the Portland region's unique challenges and concerns. The report describes ODOT's process for incorporating those partner and public input into the toll program decision-making process. It outlines future milestones and decision points, including those related to revenue allocation, and identifies how ODOT will continue to provide opportunities for input and collaboration. We've asked for and we've received a lot of useful feedback from regional agency staff in the Portland region, as well as the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee and the Regional Toll Advisory Committee over the past month. This is really a snapshot in time of what we know today. I want to recognize the need for the toll program to adapt and change when new and more refined information becomes available. This report does not make policy recommendations or program decisions, but outlines how and when those will take place. We're aiming to show the governor where the work stands, laying out the process for the work ahead. Continued conversations with advisory committees and regional partners will be necessary, as this report is not a period at the end of a sentence. Next slide. Now I'll walk through each of the chapters, not going into too much detail. I'll take a page from Mr. Brower here and keep it probably at about 10,000 feet. But I'll walk through a little bit of the, peel away the onion a little bit on it so you can see what's included in your packets as far as the timelines of these chapters. It starts from the beginning, why ODOT actually pursued tolls on I-5 and 205, again, some of that legislative direction, and how this toll program aims to manage demand and traffic congestion on the interstate, as well as generate sustainable revenue for transportation improvements. It also displays some of the decisions and milestones that have been accomplished to date. This section additionally provides a summary of those issues we face, really, if we do nothing. So we talk about some of the consequences of that, as well as the issue around sustainable revenue. We describe the range of engagement channels that ODOT's taken and established to date with regional partners and some of the decisions that have been made to this point, including our work with many of our local committees, and then some of the community-based organization work that we've been doing, which we're pretty proud of. The section of introduction also acknowledges the regional interest in toll net revenue allocation. And I know we've all heard a lot about that. We highlight these concerns we've heard from these partners on this topic and outline the path ahead to reach a decision, including discussions at the Regional Toll Advisory Committee and with the Commission. Next slide, please. Moving on to the second chapter, which again addresses our Equitable Toll Program Development Plan. This really was started and shaped by the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, and I know members of this commission have been involved, and those who haven't still have heard a lot about the real important work that's been happening there, and their work's been integral to creating the really foundation that we have around our equity work in the toll program. So it first starts this report on how we've engaged those underserved members of the community, and really most importantly, how that input that we've solicited is reflected in the plans and policies and processes that we have moving forward. Bulk of the plan does address something that you just heard a lot from Mr. Pryor, how ODOT is establishing a low-income toll program, the steps that we've taken here and the ones that are to come. And then, as you also heard, how some of that work is being centered in the statewide effort to do the rulemaking process. The chapter concludes with a section on long-term accountability, which is really important and has been to our advisors on EMAC to develop a structure or process to ensure that we stay accountable for our commitments into the future. A sequence of all these major decisions and milestones for toll collection are also provided. Some of those major ones that I'll point out for you is finalizing the toll rules and identifying the benefits. You've heard a little bit about the timeline of that a little earlier. The adverse effects and needed mitigation for the toll projects, that will be happening in 2024. And then next summer, we're planning our second EMAC ODOT accountability workshop, during which we plan to discuss options around long-term accountability. And in 2025, we'll continue those discussions with a third workshop with EMAC. And at that point, we anticipate a plan being developed. Also in 2025, we'll be able to confirm the exact discount levels and income thresholds for the low-income toll program, as well as finalizing the income verification process that Mr. Brower and his group are leading. We anticipate toll rates to be set by the commission shortly thereafter, about 6 months before toll collection begins in 2026. Next slide. So diversion management and mitigation plan, the portion of this chapter is robust and growing and has more work to be done. As mentioned, we've listened and heard a lot of concerns from local communities about traffic diversions onto local roads and how that's going to be exacerbated by tolling. It's a valid point. As we've already heard from numerous people here today, we recognize that it's already happening today due to congestion, and that's having a negative impact on the local streetway system in communities around safety and congestion issues. As we plan and design and ultimately implement tolling, our goal is to improve travel and invest in the transportation system and really minimize those impacts. That's where we're heading at it. That's kind of our thesis statement as we head into it. This section of the report outlines ODOT's goals to avoid and minimize diversion early on in the development process. And I'll just give you a couple examples through such measures as identifying the appropriate toll rate structures, which rate structures will limit diversion, and also looking at gantry locations, which gantry locations will also have the least impact on diversion. But in order to create a toll program that brings future benefits to the Portland region and the state of Oregon, ongoing monitoring is going to be crucial. To address this, the report outlines what we're calling an adaptive management framework, a summary of steps to collaborate with regional partners to assess travel and traffic diversion patterns after tolls begin and also into the future. As the toll system begins to become operational, and we find that it causes excess traffic beyond what we've modeled, and having those impacts to the local community and roadway network, we're going to work with local partners to identify solutions. We recognize that tolling in itself is not a panacea to addressing the mobility needs of the entire region. In the report, we outline how we're going to be working with regional partners to explore multimodal investments and funding opportunities to expand travel options in those tolled corridors. The sequence of decisions and milestones that will lead to toll collection are provided in your packet, and I'll highlight a few of the key milestones. Looking at the diversion mitigation timeline, early next year, we'll begin discussions on toll revenue allocation with the Regional Toll Advisory Committee and the Commission. In early 2024, we'll begin to identify gantry locations for both toll projects, the I-205 toll project and the Regional Mobility Pricing Project a little bit later in the year. We'll also be working with partners to identify a potential mitigation for the I-205 toll project and the draft adaptive traffic management framework that I just mentioned. Later in 2024, we'll identify mitigation for the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. In 2025, we'll continue to refine complementary project lists with greater levels of data on our traffic and revenue analysis. We hope to be operational early in 2026. So, next slide. Madam Chair, Commissioners, let's go wrap up a little bit, but I'm happy to answer questions and dive into details. In closing, I want to reflect back the commitment that the toll program has to continue to listen and take actions based on the feedback that we've gotten from our partners in the communities that we serve. There are many more decisions that need to be made before the toll system becomes operational. And as the governor's expressed, it's imperative that we continue to collaborate with our local communities. This implementation plan gives our partners a roadmap for those timelines of engagement and decision-making that I know that they've been craving. So appreciate any feedback and the feedback that you've already given, but the feedback that we get today is we request your approval to finalize this report before we submit it to Governor Gotek. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll stand down and answer any questions or take any feedback or comments from the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Finn. Vice Chair.
I think this is a nice piece of work and I encourage moving it forward. But as I'm listening to the presentation and thinking about it, a couple of things pop into mind. We use the term limiting diversions. I don't think there's anything we can do that limits diversion. I think what we're really talking about is discouraging or diversion or something more like that active verb. And part of the irony is that to the extent we try to address the diversion by improving congestion points or whatever, we actually then encourage diversion. So it's one of those topics, and Commissioner Baker brought that up, the whole term of diversion. It's really a tough discussion to have, because it's people are going to probably go where it's easiest to travel.
Other comments? I've got one that kind of goes with Vice Chair and is if you use an app to figure out where you're going, which anytime I come up to metropolitan area, I use an app that tells me how to get to the destination. And one of the things the app always does is divert you when there's an accident, when there's traffic, etc. And so it's going to give you the fastest route. It helps you do that diversion by listening to it. One of my question is, in our modeling, or is there any way for us to try to capture what is happening presently so we have a baseline and for the future? So then once we start the tolling process, we know this was kind of the baseline of where we were at, and this is what we're seeing in diversion. And I think that one of the things, again, it gets back to, okay, if is the diversion happening off of the highway system onto the back situation? So every exit, just put a gantry. And there you go. You've solved your problem and you're not going to divert. Now, what if I live in that community? Well, that's true. Then give the money to the locals to do improvements. I mean, I don't know. I know that's wild. I just threw that out there because I thought, you know what? Just make it tough. I mean, the thing is, most people that are living in this situation where there's congestion, they're happy to not have a congested road and pay for it because time is money. Anywhere you have to go. I left Salem last week to go to a meeting in Portland. It took me 2 hours and 15 minutes. And the whole time I was having anxiety if I was going to, one, make the meeting on time, and two, is this the way I want to live my life? And the answer was absolutely not. And I think we owe the Oregonians that are experiencing this a solution, but it's difficult because we don't have the funds, and this is the tool that we've been given. So I felt as though in reviewing the report, and we got a little peek at it earlier last week. Thank you very much for the hard work on it. And, I personally felt as though it answered a lot of the questions that the governor had. So thank you. Other comments?
Thank you, Chair.
I also appreciate all the effort that's gone into this, and I appreciate the incorporation of some of the comments that I had, especially thinking about how we got here, because I really just want to stress to anyone that thinks that we've taken this lightly. This is essentially a last resort. Like we've exhausted alternative models. We've worked with the ODOT staff to try to figure out, is there any way that we can avoid needing to have tolling on I-5 on Abernathy? And with what we currently are operating with, I don't think it's possible. We also have really conflicting priorities, and we have these assets that frankly are going to fall into the river if we don't take care of them as soon as possible. And that is a catastrophic failure for the whole economy, let alone the loss of life and the economic or the environmental devastation that would happen if we don't address the earthquake resilience of these bridges. So I really do appreciate the concerns, and I've done tours in Clackamas County and the neighboring areas with Commissioner Savas and others, thinking about the direct impact on the local communities and how we can minimize that, not just on the households that are going to be impacted by the cost of tolls, but thinking about diversion, the safety issues, the congestion, the quality of life that can come with that. So I appreciate that ODOT staff are thinking about any possible way to address those concerns, while also recognizing that we have to do it in a way that doesn't take tolling off the table, because at this point, there's really no alternative, which is an unfortunate reality. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Other comments? Yes, Commissioner Baker.
This gets back to Chair Brown, a comment that you made earlier in terms of getting started and getting this information out with so much work that's left to be done. But I think in this report, I found, some real meat in the sandwich in these exhibits that you included that were the check boxes as to what has been done and what's left to be done. And when you look at what's left to be done, there is a lot of room in here for comments, discussion, a thoughtful process. So we've begun this, but we're just beginning. And for those that are listening in, if you take a look at this and you look at these green boxes that are attached here as to what's been done and what's being contemplated to be done, there's a lot of work and a lot of opportunity for participation and discussion on this. But we've also got a deadline, so we got to get with it.
Any other comments from the commission? If not, I believe that I'm looking for a motion to accept the report to be given to Governor Kotek.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Okay. Did you get those? Okay, perfect. So we have a motion on the table. All those in favor say aye. And
Aye.
opposed? Seeing none, you have a report to present. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the commission.
Okay. The next thing on our agenda is, what do we have? We're at a break. Wow. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back to have our workshop start on the review of our 2024-28 strategic action plan. Thank you. Thank you for indulging us in a little break here. So next we are going to talk about our draft 2024-2028 strategic action plan. And Ms. Peets, our policy data and analyst division administrator, is going to speak to us. So Amanda.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for that introduction. As you stated, Amanda Peets, Policy Data and Analysis Division Administrator. Next slide, please. So I'm here with you today, kind of taking on a newer role, helping to support the strategic action plan for the agency. The purpose of today's discussion is to really make sure that the commission is comfortable with the action areas and items identified in the strategic action plan, as this will help guide agency and commission decisions for the next 5 years on really what are the priorities. So we're going to collect feedback today and then edit the document. We'll come back in January with revisions, and then revisions the next meeting after that. Next slide, please. So the strategic action plan, I wanted to start with a little bit of background on why the strategic action plan was developed in the first place. So we're now working under kind of the original version of it, and it was developed at a time when there were questions about the future of the agency. Is it going to operate as it always has? Kind of conversations around, well, it's just a highway agency, continuing business as usual. It was really our opportunity then to talk about some of the new things, some of the things that we're leaning into in different ways, showing how we're being progressive, and some of the focal areas that we could really communicate with interested parties and officials. On this update to the strategic action plan, there's a couple opportunities that I think create some changes. One is you adopted the Oregon Transportation Plan in July, which sets a vision and policy direction. So looking for ways that that connects and threads through the strategic action plan. Also bringing in more core and foundational work, communicating kind of our priorities within the funding realities that we do have, but also the need for additional funding, and then creating increased accountability. And I'll talk about each one of these a little bit more and how that's led to various content within the draft that you have before you. So I wanted to start with a kind of policy foundation piece. The strategic action plan draft is really rooted in the Oregon Transportation Plan and also builds from legislative, governor's office direction, and then kind of core activities of the agency. You can see the goals of the transportation plan reflected throughout, both directly and indirectly, the SAP draft. So directly, you'll see equity as a standalone topic area. Indirectly, you'll see kind of a theme of stewardship, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in this presentation, maybe an opportunity to enhance more directly in the plan in the next iteration. Next slide. So for the transportation plans part, the SAP carries through the 3 lenses that are identified in the OTP. And those are really that all transportation decisions should go through a lens of climate, equity, and safety. The check marks then reflect what was in the previous strategic action plan. There were climate and equity in there. Safety was not well represented. So the red boxes really try to highlight what is new and different in this version of the plan. On the right-hand side are the implementing actions, kind of the key focal areas coming out of the transportation plan. These you'll kind of see as tenets throughout the strategic action plan, and a few new areas from last time. Again, safety, so focusing on fatalities and serious injuries, as well as preservation, so maximizing the life cycle of existing assets. And I think Commissioner Chapman, you spoke to this in the last agenda topic a little bit. Next slide, please. So assets really help to be captured in some of the foundational work of the strategic action plan, not just the new things. So in other words, really getting back to the basics, the base level work that we do, the key core foundational and functional items. This is in line with many conversations that I've heard you engage in as a commission that really talk about core services the agency provides to make sure that we're delivering the transportation system that Oregon deserves. So within that core work, we're capturing customer service. So you may think about that as the picture here on the screen, that countertop service to provide licenses, other things to DMV customers. We've also made sure to kind of round out the customer service topic by also including how the traveling public is affected by the services that we provide. So the maintenance services to keep the roads open, operational, and functional. So kind of that operational customer service, as you will. The actions under customer service focus on accessibility and really trying to meet people where they are. So an example of that is kind of the self-serve kiosks from DMV, where it's providing those in grocery stores and locations and communities where people are, increasing that accessibility side. The other component is automation, where we're really trying to make the way that we do business be more efficient through technology, which really then reduces the steps in the process and therefore gets the products to our customers faster and more timely. For preservation, at its core, truly is stewardship. It is making investments to protect the initial upfront cost of infrastructure that we put in and making sure that those last long term and to really stay in a state of good repair across the multimodal transportation system. The outcome is especially challenged right now with our current funding outlook. Not only that with kind of insufficient funds, but also coupled with increased climate change and extreme weather events that are making it more and more challenging, like in the picture shown, flooding and other issues when we're not able to get out there, clean out the drainages and other systems. Actions in this category focus on resiliency, as well as identifying key and priority routes. Next slide. Funding is obviously a foundational element, and we've made it much more so and implicitly in this plan. It's really around making sure that we're good stewards of public funds. So that includes focusing, on that core work, those essential services that we provide. It's by making sure that we're on budget. We're meeting our scope, schedule, and budget of projects. It's managing within our means as well. We only have a certain and constrained funding. We need to manage to that level and make changes accordingly. We also need to recognize that the transportation system is vastly underfunded. This has been a topic of conversation, I think, every single commission meeting. So it talks about securing additional funds to make sure that we make significant advancements in the other priority areas in a modern transportation system and in equity. The SAP identifies the need to diversify our funding portfolio, index our transportation fees. Based on some feedback that we've received to date, we're likely to make some changes in this section to make the narrative stronger, using more kind of actionable language as we do that. Next slide, please. The other important component of stewardship, really at its root, is accountability. Making sure that we're accountable to key actions that we identify, to the 3 lenses identified in the Oregon Transportation Plan of safety, equity, and climate. For safety, unfortunately, fatalities are at a 33-year high. So we're seeing those increase more and more. This trend is happening nationally as well. We're engaged in a lot of conversations with other state DOTs and our federal partners on how we address this safety crisis. Part of that really is an all hands on deck approach, what we call safe systems, which is really around safe people, safe vehicles, safe roads, safe speeds, and post-crash care. It requires all of those components, not just an engineering solution, but all of those pieces. Speeding, impairment, distracted driving, we all know are helping to drive up these numbers. For our part, what we try to do is identify actions in which can help prevent crashes, or when they do occur, to have them be less severe so that people aren't dying on the roadways. We do this through engineering, education, and enforcement. So some of the actions you'll see in this section include implementing a safe systems approach on key corridors, as well as for vulnerable road users. So just for that vernacular, that's talking about bicyclists, pedestrians, as well as motorcyclists. Exploring use of technology, such as enforcement in work zones. Working on legislative and policy options around things like automated enforcement, impairment, and vulnerable user safety, and improving the timeliness of crash data. For equity, we focus on how we look, listen, and act. So the 2 dimensions that I would really talk about here are workforce development, as one, both inside and outside the agency. So what we look like as an agency in terms of the types of employees we try to recruit, how we retain them, how they're trained and what the requirements are, but also how we contract with externals to try to expand capacity of historically underutilized businesses. The other dimension is getting to more equitable outcomes in the decisions we make. So in the investments and in the decisions, that's working with, listening to, and benefiting communities by the way we act to really help make the outcomes be more equitable overall. For climate, pretty similar to the previous strategic action plan, we focus on emission reduction for both ourselves as an agency and for the traveling public. For ourselves, reducing ODOT's carbon footprint, we look at using cleaner materials and fuels in construction of projects, at our building energy use, some of those types of features. For the traveling public, it's identifying ways consistent now with the transportation plan of reducing passenger vehicle miles traveled per capita and identifying strategies around that. Also recognizing that some people continue to drive and need to drive, trying to make every single mile driven clean, which we continue then to lean into transportation electrification by adding charging infrastructure across the state with our private partners. For climate, adaptation and resilience is under the preservation slide. So if you're looking for that, that's captured there. Climate as a standalone topic is mostly about emission reduction. Next slide. Okay. The SAP also includes actions continued from before. In other words, finish what we said that we would do. So that includes working to reduce congestion in the Portland metropolitan area, which is completion of some of the major projects there, some of the discussion that you had earlier on your agenda, as well as improvements to the multimodal transportation system in that area to reduce congestion. Next is active and public transportation, which is essential for providing services and getting people access to things that they may not otherwise have and critical needs. Actions here include improving accessibility by following through on ADA commitments, establishing multimodal corridors, and increasing overall connectivity. The actions discussed fit within these priority areas. These are carried over from the previous strategic action plan, so sufficient and reliable funding, equity, and modern transportation system. While the previous strategic action plan was 3 years, this one is 5. That allows for covering a broader range of commitments. Slide. This slide is really here for reference. I'm not going to pause on it long. It's to show the difference between actions of the 21-23 strategic action plan and this current draft. Before ending, I wanted to briefly talk about the process that's led to the draft that's before you today. A fair amount of work has been done internally, working with subject matter experts and practitioners to identify actions that are most impactful. There's been an internal advisory committee and conversations across the agency from all levels of staff up through senior leadership. Next slide. There has been some discussions externally as well, some targeted engagement with a July ACT and Modal Chairs meeting, also several presentations to individual area commissions on transportations and to the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, which Commissioner Smith chairs. The draft in your packet now is public. So we are continuing that engagement with those entities and more, also figuring out with our tribal partners how they'd like to consult on this and getting their feedback. So we're collecting that through early January, so mid-January. So by the next commission meeting, we plan to share that feedback with you and get some perspectives on how you'd like to address that. So the next steps are the workshop today, and in true workshop fashion, we do have a flip chart to the side if we need to write some notes. And then we'll have that targeted partner engagement with the public. January, we'll come back. We'll try to revise the strategic action plan based on what we hear here today. Then we will share with you the public comments and then get additional comments from you. revise it again with bringing it in March for your consideration to see if you're ready to finalize that document. And then we have a commitment long-term around that accountability for making sure we're coming back on a regular basis. So with that, happy to take any and all feedback on the document and appreciate any direction that you'd like to give us.
So thank you, Amanda, for giving us the draft of this. I know that all of us have wanted to comment and to be part of building our strategic action plan. Well done, by the way. And at this point, I'm going to turn to the commissioners and see if anybody has specific questions or comments that they would like to make for the record. So Commissioner Baker, I saw you looked at me.
You were staring at me.
I was.
I've got a few. Should we just go front to back, Amanda? Is that how you'd like to?
At your pleasure, Commissioner.
Okay. I like to dig into the words, and I apologize for that. So I made it to page 3 and saw a really important word in the second paragraph, and that's transparent. And one of the things that I've heard as a new commissioner is how difficult it is to find information. And as we're looking at our strategies going forward, for anybody to be able to get in and search and find what they're looking for, I think is really important. And you've touched on it in a couple of spots within the plan. But I would say, what I hear more than often, and I experience myself too, it's kind of hard to find information. And there's terrific tools out there for finding information. Also, this issue, the very last sentence there, the wider range of mobility choices for Oregonians, that has a big impact on our funding. And the mechanism that we have in place, and even to the extent of what does the trucking industry pay for? What are they responsible for? Well, all of these variable pieces in terms of the bike pass, the multimodal. It creates a whole different dimension to how we fund and how we move forward. I got all the way to page 5, and I loved what you said about the strategic outcomes, and it represents actionable steps and tangible results. I think when we get to the end of this plan, if we go back and say, did we create a plan where we had actionable steps, and we can point, to the work and say we had tangible results on all these really important things, that's our ultimate metric. Over on page 7 and opportunities, when we talk about safety is greatly impacted by user behavior such as speeding, driver distraction, impairment, but can be mitigated through engineering, enforcement, education, and more. I think, we ought to say, what's the most effective? Where do we start? Because, this is one where, this accident rate, this death rate, the injury rate that's on its way up, I don't see it self-correcting. Mm-hmm. There needs to be some things that we need to do. Some of it, is practical engineering, but a whole lot of it is related to engineering and, education and having people think about their behavior and whether you're going to get behind the wheel if you've had, if you're intoxicated. Down in the implementing actions, I love what you said about countermeasures, taking countermeasures quickly, but we need a definition of quickly, because what may be a definition of quickly for me could be, completely different than somebody else. So this is one of those aspirational items, I think, here. So what does quickly mean? And how fast are we able to react? And when we talk about, great things for Oregonians and our public to be able to react quickly, like you've said here, to these obvious hazards that are out there, we should define what that is so we know how to measure ourselves. I love the fact that when we talk about the assets through here, you've mentioned good condition, good condition, good condition everywhere. Because I think that that's the objective. That was part of our transportation plan. And that 4-column graph, Amanda, that you've put, we've had a chance to talk about it a little bit. I think that becomes a really important discussion point because that fourth bar graph, which is what we need in order to implement the plan, which is a sensible, non-wasteful plan that we've envisioned as a commission and you've envisioned as ODOT. That is what good looks like. We ought to be able to give the legislators also a real clear picture as to what fair looks like. Because there's a lot of things that need funding in the state and there's a lot of decisions that need to be made. But if we can say, here's what it takes for these levels, and these are our promises at each of those levels, I think it would be really helpful without any ambiguity. There's going to be a little ambiguity, of course, but if we can eliminate as much ambiguity out of those big numbers, those big placeholders, so that we all can talk about it, I think that would be something that would be really good in the plan. In the number 5, implement decision-making processes to improve equitable outcomes. I think our first goal here was kind of my first goal decades ago when I was starting to think about how to make progress here, and that's to take a look at census data and measure ourselves based on the community. We need more than that. This is more than recruiting and filling jobs. This is, in my mind, the most important thing is what's the experience that all of our employees are having, and what's the engagement level, and how do they feel about their job? So in my notes in here, as I was going through it, I think the employee survey, in terms of a metric, as a place to go when we're taking a look at employee engagement. And this is where we really get to, do people feel like they're being included? And you want to solve issues relative to minority hiring. You have a place that is a fabulous place to work for everybody, and everybody will become recruiters for you. So you come to work for ODOT, it's a fantastic spot. So, for us to be able to get feedback from employee surveys, I think is a great method. I mean, it's scary when you say, tell us what you think, because there's no better place to know if we're making progress on DE&I than to ask our employees. I'm all the way over to page 16. And we've got this is talking about something near and dear to your heart, which is automating processes. And we say we're going to implement 2 new systems to manage public records and requests. And I wonder about 2. Do we need 2, or can we do it with the right one? And I saw it a couple of times in there. That could be one of those areas. And again, I'm sorry for getting too down in the weeds, but just wondering if the right information system where we build and maintain 1 rather than 2 might be the answer. I made the same comment I just made here in our strategic outcomes with regard to utilizing local community census data to better understand where to invest in recruitment. I think that's great. We just need to have something about the actual experience. There's a couple of places where we talk about budget reductions to allow ODOT to operate within available resources. And I'm wondering if, rather than using the term budget reductions, if we're really talking about efficiencies. And that would really appeal to me, I think, and it would be a good message, I think, to our staff that, you know, if we ask the question, what stands in your way of doing your job in a better way, that we can look for efficiencies rather than necessarily budget reductions, because efficiencies will lead to reductions. The final thought that I had is back in again, the list that we have: implement decision-making processes to improve equitable outcomes. It was very interesting when we were up on the interstate bridge with Greg Johnson, and he was talking about the need for skilled workers, and that he was actually thinking about ways to get educational curriculum into the junior highs and moving that far back to start getting our kids to think about trades careers, and I would say it's beyond trades, it's administrative careers and so on. That maybe there's something that we can be thinking about here in terms of a participation with our education system, junior high, high school, community college, colleges, where we're really thinking about, you know, the kinds of careers and being able to, you know, attract the diverse population to, you know, consider being a part of what we do or supplying services to what we do. And I thought, you know, Greg's thinking on that was so good that maybe we could include something in our strategic plan in and around, you know, building that workforce. And there's probably, you know, another thing that we can put in there in terms of mid-career, you know, people that would be interested in making a change and seeing an opportunity. So that's it. I know we went through it really fast, so hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. That was very helpful. Chair Brown, would you mind if I said a few words?
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. So a couple of things, maybe I'll just mention one. I took a lot of notes, so thank you. All those comments and specificity was extremely helpful. I'll just speak more generally to a couple points that were brought up. One is the strategic action plan itself focuses kind of on the action level. The work that goes at the next level down is around milestones, which I think might get at some of the points that you're making, Commissioner Baker, around kind of how do we kind of draw that line in the sand? How do we set the threshold of where we're trying to get some of those pieces? So that certainly comes next. We can look for opportunities, however, to also include that in the action plan, I think, as appropriate there. The other piece, and Lisa, would you mind flipping back to, I think it's slide 8, because Commissioner Baker, you referenced a chart that I showed earlier, and I just want to share with folks what chart that is, and I think what we're talking about. So it's this chart, I believe, that talks about transportation funding. And this chart comes from the Oregon Transportation Plan. And what it shows is our current level of funding and what we truly need to fully implement the transportation plan, what we truly need to get to a full state of good repair across our multimodal transportation system is substantially more than what we have today, which makes the funding piece so foundational to all the pieces that we do. It doesn't mean that we can't make progress in other areas. That's what the strategic action plan does. It commits us to making progress in all those things that are in there with the means that we have, and recognize there's such a significant gap to the system that we need to get to, that we need to try to fill that with a funding piece. So thanks for bringing those points up. Chair Brown, if helpful, a couple of the themes I've heard in conversations with you previously that I think might garner a fair amount of interest include safety, funding, and probably equity are the ones that I hear most about. If it's helpful, happy to focus on those topics, or if you want to go kind of commissioner by commissioner, either approach is helpful.
So that'd be a question for the commissioners. Do you want to continue doing like we just did, or do you want to focus on just certain areas? What's the pleasure of the commission? Oh, I see Commissioner Smith.
I'm finally going to say something. I think it'd be helpful for everybody to kind of say their highlights and their thoughts, and that might generate kind of a deeper dive into the certain subject areas. So I'm kind of a proponent of let's have all of us weigh in and then go from there.
Hey, and since you brought that up, then we will let you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate all the work that you've done and really appreciate having this deeper discussion with the commission. We need to be partners in this plan, and so I think it's really a good work to do this deeper dive. Two of the things that struck me, that kind of leaped out at me in this plan, which I think are good, is one, the focus on sufficient and reliable funding, and two, really elevating safety. I think we've done a really good job over the last 3 years, the last strategic action plan, really honing our perspective on the three lenses that we view all of our work through. And it's important that we highlight the fact that we can't do the work that we need to do in all of these areas unless we have sufficient and reliable funding. And I think we're elevating that message. We're talking about it with the community. We're talking about it with the legislators. And that has got to be one of our highest priorities and action items going into the 2025 legislative session. And we've started to lay that groundwork, but I think it's fundamental for our work next in this coming year to really elevate that as part of our work. The other thing that I think is really critical is focusing in safety. I mean, it is just tragic that traffic fatalities and serious injuries have been steadily increasing. And, you know, we can talk about a lot about why, but I think one of the biggest factors is, people who are not following the rules and driving impaired and driving distracted. And I think through COVID, people have lost a little bit of perspective. I think we saw a lot of reduction in enforcement, and I'm thinking that we really need to increase not just education but enforcement, because people won't change their behavior if they think nobody is going to do anything about it. So I think looking at one of your implementing actions, obviously opportunities to enforce speeds in work zones and make overall conditions safer across the system is critical. We need to protect our workers. They are so vulnerable out there. And if people are distracted driving, they decide they want to go fast in a work zone, we need to have the tools to prevent that. And I hate to be the enforcer, but at some point we really need to get people to change their behavior. So the other thing that I was very interested in is engaging in development of policy options to increase safety focused on automated enforcement, driver education, and micromobility safety. I'm wondering, is 2025 the right year to start that? Because if we are going to want to do a policy option package for the 25 year, it seems to me that ought to start happening in 24. And maybe I'm misunderstanding the scope of that timing, but to me, that is an effort that I think I personally would like to see us move up in our priorities. So those were my high level thoughts. I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Do I have another commissioner that would like to speak next? And Commissioner Chapman, you looked at me, so you're it.
I have.
You've got it.
Well, Amanda, thank you for all of the hard work on this. And I'm glad to see that my comments specifically related to reducing vehicle miles traveled and then thinking about equity internally and externally, that those have been incorporated beautifully. So well done. With safety, just going through some of the broader topics, I was reminded of the conversation that we had at our tri-state meeting about automation and fully autonomous vehicles, and thinking about technology as sort of this both the cause of and potentially solution to a lot of our safety challenges, and especially with distracted driving and impaired driving. I think it's really important for us to have a plan that has both a long-term scope so we can address some of these bigger picture goals, but then also recognizing the rapidly evolving technology and the need to be able to be flexible and adaptive as that technology may provide some solutions, but also that's especially people looking at their phones while they're driving, that's a big problem. And we need to be able to iterate the design over the next 5 years accordingly. In terms of like the logical framework, I think it's great to have these big picture goals and these really specific actions of how we're going to achieve those goals. And then, as you said, the next step is getting into the monitoring, evaluation, and setting metrics so we can really hold ourselves accountable and then iterate as needed. So excited for that phase. And then the elephant in the room, funding. I mean, really thinking about coming into the 2025 legislative session and having a better understanding of our various revenue sources, especially if we're moving forward with tolling, how that's going to factor into what the ask is going to be in 2025. It's not too soon to already be thinking about that. So I'm glad to see that in there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Vice Chair.
Well, first, I want to appreciate your work. I mean, this is a big improvement over what we had before. So I really like it a lot, the way, still digesting the format of it a little bit, but I like what we're doing here. For me, I think our two biggest priorities are obviously safety. Always has to be safety, has to be at the top. And the other one is preserving the public's asset. Safety, as Amanda knows, I've been talking with her a lot about this, and I'm still noodling on the difference between what we can do versus, things that are out of our control. And obviously a lot of when you get up, particularly outside the metro area or the urbanized area, a lot of it's speed and lack of enforcement. And probably ought to be talking some about how we can work with and focus that with OSP or even local law enforcement a little bit more on that. I actually was noodling on something I didn't think I'd ever say, but I'm wondering about putting automated systems on the highways. Something I worked a long time to block in the legislature, but I've changed my mind.
Well, thank you.
People will be surprised who worked with me around there, but I kind of wonder about that. I've come to believe we're never going to get the funding we need for the system, and maybe there is a middle ground on automation that actually fits in this. We probably ought to explore that.
Just kidding, not police.
Well, I don't believe it is saying that, but some of that, a lot of our focus tends to be on the bicycle and the pedestrian. I don't want to diminish that, but sometimes I think we forget some of the other stuff that's happening there and don't acknowledge some of the work that we've done and can do with rumble strips and things like rumble strips in the medians and some of the highways and even fog lines, which I've come to believe is a real issue out there and do that. So some of that on that. The maintenance stuff, we've for years used this percentage of all the highways. I kind of wonder, and realistically, I don't know that we're ever going to get them all up to the standard, everything. I wonder if we should be prioritizing that in some way. I mean, seems to me like our primary focus is on the key highways for the system. And maybe we ought to make sure they're recognizing some differences there with that. So that's kind of some general comments that are there. But again, you did a good job on getting measurable things on a lot of this. Some of them are still not quite to the point of being able to measure, did we do it or did it make a difference or not? And I think that's just a work in progress, trying to figure out how to do that.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
But I think we're on the right track.
Thank you.
One last comment was looking at all this, I'm a little bit overwhelmed with everything, and I'm always a little, when you have too many priorities, sometimes it leads to not having any priorities. I'm still noodling on that a little bit.
Okay, well, thank you for all of the commissioners' comments. I have to say thank you for the hard work from the staff on this. You did an excellent job trying to capture a lot of the conversations we've had over the last year and just listening to where we feel like we need to direct our energy. The funding strategy, you know, is always going to be my number one. That's what I'm all about. I'm always trying to find that dollar to make this work. No matter what we want to put on paper as far as a plan, we don't have the funds to do it. It's just a plan that's going to sit on the shelf. So I think that you've heard from all of us that we are committed to trying to find the dollars. This strategic action plan will go to the governor, and my understanding, and Director, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of the agencies are doing similar strategic action plans, correct, that are going to the governor. And I think that this is where some of the work can tie in together to make it really something that's robust for the state of Oregon, where all the levers are kind of being moved at the same time. So if you're looking at safety and you're looking at the Oregon State Police, you know, there's another agency that is over that. So I'm excited about that. When we get to the safety piece of it, I think that I drive a lot of miles up and down the I-5 corridor, and I have to say I've seen a bigger presence of state troopers lately, which is great. So now I know where they're hiding, but with that said, they're out there, and I'm glad to see enforcement, because I'm telling you that people are not, they're exceeding the speed limit all the time. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about on the electrification, greenhouse gas, and the reduction of VMT. I feel like by putting all the electrification stations in place and really driving people towards electric vehicle, we are not going to see a reduction in vehicle miles travel, that people are going to continue driving, which really adds to our congestion problem. And so we're making it easy. Now they feel good about what they're driving because they aren't polluting. And the greenhouse gases are being reduced, but the congestion is not being addressed. So we're creating, it's kind of a weird narrative. And I think that maybe if we strengthen the piece about public transportation, public transit, bike ped, that piece is going to be important. And, you know, I'm going to bang this drum just because of where I sit, but we have to really start getting our transit systems to work. They're not working. We don't have enough dollars to be able to make a change to where we can reduce that congestion. And I think that Commissioner Savas is a good voice on that end of it. He has talked about that repeatedly on 205. There is no transit. There is not enough there to make people change their behavior and don't drive and don't have that diversion. There isn't a way for them to have accessibility. So I think that that's huge. The other piece of it, let's see, I think that was it mostly. The safety piece of it, the one thing too is we have an advisory committee, a safety advisory committee, and I cut my teeth on that committee early on in my career, and that needs to be beefed up, and we need to really look at that and see what their focus is, because really their focus has been very small, and their narrative as far as safety, they're not making the difference in making sure that policy is in place. So they're not talking to us enough. They're just kind of siloed. And I think that if we're going to go with a lens of safety and really focus on that, we need to beef up what their narrative is and their work. So we're looking at their work plan, and what they do for us as an advisory committee is going to be important. I think that's it from me. And at this point, I'll just turn it over to you. And I'm sure there's lots of comments running through your head as far as what you've heard from us and where you think we might have missed something, and some additional things that you'd like us to think about.
Yeah, Chair Brown, I think excellent comments from all of you. So really appreciate those. And I'm glad to hear that we're reflecting back some of the themes that we've heard you talk about as important because they're important to our agency as well. A couple things. Safety was talked about a fair amount. And I am really liking what they call the safe system approach. We talked about it in the transportation plan. I've talked about it a little bit here because it is multidimensional. I think Vice Chair Byer, to some of your points about, what is our role within the kind of bigger picture of things. And it is really around those safe speeds, safe roads, safe people, safe vehicles. That's where we get to the connected automated vehicles and kind of that post-crash care. It's all of those components together. We cannot solve it with one just engineering solution. It requires all of those things. So appreciate the comments there. And I think that's something we need to dive into more. And Chair Brown, I'll just also mention kind of relative to your last point with the Oregon Transportation Safety Committee. We had the Act and Modal Chairs Committee meeting, which you attended and Vice Chair Byer did last week. And we had the various modal committees and the area commissions on transportation talk about the work plans, talk about their priorities. And I think they were very excited to share with one another what those priorities are. They're also, at least the area commissions on transportation, are committed to providing those work plans for you all to see, to weigh in on and deliberate on. So I think there's opportunities maybe to have the modal committees do the same so that we're seeing kind of that alignment and better utilization with our committee partners on that. So I appreciate those comments. And that was kind of going through my head as well as we were talking. Other than that, I might defer to our assistant directors. Oh, sorry, Vice Chair.
You're on. You're on.
Okay, reacting to the chair's comments about, I'll be honest, I've always been skeptical of the notion of reducing VMT. I understand why we'd want to do it. I just don't think we're going to be successful at it. And largely, most of the strategies have to do with urban development. And if you look at how we're applying those, where we're doing that new congested urban development is always out on the periphery. And if you look at for the Portland area, there's certainly a lot of stuff that's happening high rise in the downtown area. Most of it's very expensive, but the growth that's happening on the periphery is increasing, which actually leads to increasing VMT, not reducing it. The other piece is I think the basic solution is making transit more available and, that and frequency. And that's really the real issue there. I think there's monetary constraint. You have to make it really easy and compatible to get it there. So I think those are issues. The goal, I get it and I'm supportive of it, but I'm pretty skeptical of it. The last one was the comment. I was thinking a lot on the congestion in Portland and our strategy, congestion management on the freeway. There's a really good chance that what that will do is cause congestion elsewhere on the other road system, which may cause people to use alternative transportation.
Right. And I think for transit safety it's another key piece of it. So it falls into that too. There's like a perception that it's not safe, which is not necessarily true. And so, we have to work with our public transit providers to make sure that we're meeting that piece of it. So when we talk about our strategic action plan and we're talking about safety, that it's going to key them into their work plans. Like when you talked about the modal, all of those concerns are also going to come forward and we might glean something from it that we actually want to put in our strategic action plan. So.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair, for those comments. Maybe I'll speak to vehicle miles traveled for a moment, just to say, purposely in the Oregon Transportation Plan, that wasn't just under the climate action. I think the climate action was recognizing that you need a combination of vehicles miles traveled and clean transportation. But it was broader than that. It's that congestion topic that you talked about. It's the maximizing the existing capacity of the multimodal transportation system that we do have, making that more efficient, cost effective. So I think there's a number of things that benefit from that. And I think as to actions, Vice Chair Byer, I think primarily focused on increasing options for people, increasing bicycle, pedestrian, public transportation options. There's some education components in terms of trip chaining and opportunities to save money personally, but also have other benefits that are broader than that. So I think those are kind of some of the ways in which we think about it from a more strategy basis. So I just thought I'd share those. Otherwise, I'd love to turn to our assistant directors to see if they have any comments or other thoughts that they would like to share, but no pressure. Otherwise, if you don't have any, I just want to offer that opportunity. So.
There is pressure.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Chair Brown. So just for the record, Lindsay Baker with the Oregon Department of Transportation. So I really just kind of wanted to say thank you also to Amanda for the hard work and really to the team that has spent a lot of time and effort and energy on getting to this sort of current version of the SAP that's before you. I think the second thing I would offer is, so I've been plugged into a lot of these kind of various conversations over the past few months and weeks and months, thinking about how are we collectively as a state and you all as a body prioritizing the efforts before us. And I think a lot about what I'm hearing from each of you, but I will call it Commissioner Chapman and Commissioner Smith in particular around what are we doing looking ahead to the 2025 legislative session. So the things around equity, safety, sort of, what I think of as mode agnostic safety, right? Safety of the entire system is something that you all are articulating in your own ways, and also is what we are hearing from the legislature, from the public, from every single community group that we are working with, from every sort of stakeholder group and membership association. And it's just really, I would say, helpful and really affirming to hear all of the alignment that is around and how much energy and momentum is really present. So I think really the task before us is really taking that feedback and figuring out how to operationalize it with a level of concreteness and tangibility. And that's really the next step ahead. And then I just really wanted to offer a final thought, which is sort of in response, Commissioner Smith, to your question around one of the implementing actions around 2025 and your reflection of, doesn't that work start right now? And the answer is it absolutely does. So without really sort of getting ahead of myself, I think one of the things we'll talk about in January is I will bring before you all a set of legislative concepts that we will be working on over the calendar year 2024. And one of those will be very much focused around this safety. So work zone specific safety is inclusive of that, but it is not only that. And really, how can we take the engineering and the education and the behavior modification and also our, any other tools that we've got available, including in enforcement, and really take those as it's not a one size fits all, it's not a silver bullet, but all of these things work in concert to make the system safer. And so I'm really looking forward to that conversation that can dive in a little bit deeper, but really using the strategic action plan as that kind of launchpad, I guess, and starting point. And again, I just wanted to sort of appreciate and affirm how much we're hearing similar themes and similar categories of prioritization that is really broad reaching. And I think really sets a really great foundation for the work that we've got in 2024 that leads to what I'm hopeful and optimistic will be really successful in the 2025 session. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Chair Brown, while we're on the theme of safety, I did want to respond to and appreciate your comment about the safety committee. The Transportation Safety Committee operates out of our Transportation Safety Office, which is now located in the DMV under Amy Joyce's leadership. She and I have had many conversations about that committee and the opportunity we have to, as you say, sort of strengthen its work, broaden it out, de-siloize it a little bit, because it has been fairly narrow in the past. We've had some opportunities for membership transition in the recent years. Unfortunately, you were not able to stick around for very long because you were brought onto the Transportation Commission. But we have some other new members who have brought sort of a new level of interest and passion around some new topics to bring up. So I am hopeful that Transportation Safety Committee will help challenge us and move us forward in safety in ways that perhaps they haven't as much in the past. So you have our commitment. We'll continue that process of addressing that committee's opportunities to really drive a safety agenda forward.
Thank you, Travis. I think it is important. And I think that when we have people in our community that volunteer their time to be on these various committees. It's important that we actually use them and give them a challenge to actually make a difference. And so I appreciate your comments. So thank you.
Chair Brown and members of the commission, just for the record, Leah Horner, Assistant Director for Operations. I just, again, want to reiterate the thanks to the team for putting all of this work together. And I also want to thank each of you for all of the time and feedback and energy that has come towards this document in its current iteration. It is super helpful. And when I look at this, I come at it a little bit from the perspective of internal operations, right? Like, even though that's not really what operations is, but how are we then going to operationalize what these priorities are after they have been kind of documented, articulated, and then setting clear expectations for the what's next around some of these priorities. And I think that that's super important. I think as Chair, as you mentioned, this will be going to the governor's office. Each agency is working on strategic plans. I think ours comes at it from a little bit different perspective where we actually have prioritized big things. And that's really important as we're looking at what our vision direction is in the future, both externally, but also internally. And how are we kind of moving in the direction of what that looks like? I think we are starting some work that we've shared with each of you around things like, and I don't want to put too many expectations out there, but around a dashboard, like how are we kind of leaning into some of these things that are actually tangible that come out of the expectations around these as priorities. So I just appreciate all of the feedback and the work that has gone into this. And I think that it provides us a really good starting point for the future.
Thank you for your comments, Leah. And since, I put all of you on the spot, I guess I'm going to swivel this way to the director and say, Director, your comments, because I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so Madam Chair, thank you. A couple of things I've been jotting down notes here because there's been a lot in the discussion. Maybe I start first with kind of where we sit as far as expectations. So the governor has obviously put the expectation out that each agency should have a strategic plan. I'm heartened to say that we've been operating under our strategic action plan for the last 3 years. And so we've got a great foundation and that's going to serve that need. And this is the right time to have the next iteration. In fact, it was timed perfectly, if not coincidentally, with the expectation. One of the things that we heard in the last process, though, was there needed to be more engagement by the commission itself. There needed to be more ownership at various levels of the staff within the agency. And there needed to be more dialogue amongst the commissioners to create a space to say, if we do this, then there's these consequences or benefits, et cetera, so that you can really have that quality discussion and ultimately have a shared outcome and a shared ownership in the strategic action plan. I think this process is doing that. And I think we've made modifications in the process, and I appreciate your willingness to engage in the process like that because it really does show ownership. We use the strategic action plan as the foundation for our decision-making. It's going to set markers for our goals leading into 25. It's going to set markers for frankly, weighing priorities and how we spend the scarce resources that we have already. And it's going to set targets for things that we have to accomplish even though we're strapped for cash. I'm especially heartened by the safety element coming to the forefront. And I want to thank all of you, and especially Commissioner Smith, for the comments about the employees. Fundamentally, we can't keep the public safe if we aren't safe. And so our team must be safe first. They have to focus on their individual safety. They have to focus on each other. And if they don't do that, then not only do we lose each other, but we lose the ability to serve the public. They know that, and they're really dedicated teams across the agency. We have almost 5,000 people in the agency really dedicated to Oregonians, and we need to prioritize safety in that order. And I appreciate hearing from the commission, and they do too, that that's an important factor for you as well. So thank you for that. The other thing that I would say is, as it relates to what we can do. So I'm in complete agreement with what the team has said. There's things we can do with the engineering. There's things we can do in education. There's things we can do in enforcement. And frankly, we're going to see market conditions change to the point of technology shifting safety. I'll use myself as an example. There was a time I never used GPS when it first came out because I didn't need it. I knew where I was going. And I've graduated to a point to where I use it almost all the time so that it tells me how long it takes to get to a certain destination. That's an important factor because it's changed my behavior. And in some ways, I no longer have to remember every turn, and that's been a detriment, I will tell you, in my own thinking. So as I think about the safety elements that come from the marketplace, those are things that contribute. There's pros and cons to each. I do want to say, though, as it relates to the engineering aspect and the things that we can do within the agency, I think we've long in the sector, and I do say in the sector, this is not an ODOT only issue, right? And I've worked in other places, you know that. And the transportation sector has long relied on the fact that we've done as much as we can do on the engineering side. And the rest is all just education and all these other elements. I think we've realized that there's more we can do and that we have to have more judgment and latitude in trying things to improve upon what we have because we've seen the number of incidents increase. Doesn't mean they're all going to work day one, but it does mean that we've got really talented and intelligent people that are focused on this. And we have to give them the latitude to make some of those decisions and try new things. Otherwise, we'll just be resting in that must be somebody else's responsibility kind of space. So it's a culture thing. And then lastly, as it relates to transit and availability and the funding, we have transit deserts all over the state. And the more we can do to fund those systems that create access and opportunity, we will see more ridership. And then that ridership will help us in the long term, especially when we look at reducing BMT. I will argue that there are some projects out there that create such a bottleneck that congestion actually increases VMT. And so alleviating some of those bottlenecks is important. But we also have to look at all of the other options because our system actually could function pretty well if we had better time of day management of that system and we had more options within the system. I think the strategic action plan really focuses on all of those different elements of the transportation system in a complementary way, and then also provides for a public comment opportunity, because that is the other thing that was lacking in the last strategic action plan. So a lot to say, but really it's all founded in appreciation for each of you diving in because this is important work and it will guide our next 5 years.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to turn once again, any other closing comments from the commission?
Sure.
Wow. Yes. Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, just great work on this. Very, very thoughtful.
Thank you. Chair Brown, if I may, I do want to give a shout out in the back of the room to Mary McGowan, who's been the primary staff person. Mary, you want to do the wave back there? She's been instrumental in pulling this work together and deserves a great share of that credit. I'd also point out that I had a phone a friend option with our statewide traffic engineer, statewide safety traffic engineer, which is Christy McDaniel Wilson in the back of the room as well. And I did bring her along and she was, I'm going to embarrass her for a moment, very excited to come here and have a conversation about safety because we have so many people committed to this really important topic in the agency and so excited to talk about it more. So I think as we operationalize the strategic action plan, know that there are many folks that are willing to engage in this conversation in a very deep and meaningful way with each of you.
And did we cover what you wanted to hear us say, or is there a comment that you'd like to make? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think
No,
okay.
they're looking.
Yeah.
Who's she talking about?
They
The
thought they
phone
got
a
away,
friend.
so-
No. You're gonna make your phone a friend coming up. Anyway, I just want to thank you all again. You know, and we were thrilled that we were able to have a workshop on this. I think it's important for the commissioners to be able to sit down and really look at these subjects. I know that it's a lot of work for the staff. I want to thank each one of you for the work that you did. Thank you for the booklet. I know that was extra work to put it together for us, but giving us time to really glean through the information, write down our comments. We were also shooting comments off earlier in the week to the staff. And so it's important. I mean, I think that a lot of people, a lot of times feel like as a commission, we're given a set of, some information. Here's your information, vote on it. or make a decision on it, not understanding that there is work that's being done in the background by each of us. So we are reviewing the documents, we are making comments to them, and we're trying to put some thoughtful comments together for the staff to maybe even beef it up a little bit further. So again, thank you to everyone. We are going to get out of here an hour early. Wow. Which is great, which means that I get to go back down I-5. And since my husband's driving, he's safer than I am. So there won't be any tickets tonight. But anyway, with that said, I want to adjourn the meeting, but I hope everyone has a happy holiday and thank you for your time. We're adjourned.
Bye, everyone.